he's a lot larger than these two. And this is the problem, and I think, you know, it depends on what side of the fence you're on. But he's had quite a big meal already. He's had a lot to eat. So, I think for them just to have a little bit is not a bad thing. And he still has some of the meat left in the tree. And judging by the look of him, he is certainly doing well for himself. He is in tip-top condition. And you'd like to know if what we're seeing here will form part of my research for my PhD, and at this point, no. But what you might not be aware, but we did actually managed to get a paper written about the interactions of Karula and her family, because the academic world just does not know about it. It really is amazing that no one else has written about the interactions. And we've really made history here with WildEarth because of what we witnessed. And going in to do my PhD, I could write this paper. And I actually did my PhD through the University of Reading, and my professor was actually on board, who helped me write it yesterday with my fellow PhD candidates, and Becky Thomas as well. She also helped me to write that paper, and Mark Fellows, who's my supervisor, so we could actually get that story out there, and without their help I couldn't have done it. But it was accepted by a journal. And what was really interesting is there's been people asking for a paper, and they've actually started seeing this behaviour in Namibia. They're starting to document it, and it has happened throughout the Sabi Sands. There has been a number of cases where family have been interacting, and I wonder if it is actually the normal behaviour for leopards nowadays. Now, it might be that years gone by, the leopards weren't seen very often, so some of it was documented, but not nearly as much now. And I think with obviously the media opening up, the social media, there's a lot more interactions, obviously more people going on safari, they can afford to go to safari, so there's a lot of pictures around, there's the blogs as well on the internet, there's so much information nowadays. So it could be this behaviour was happening years ago, but it just wasn't documented. It could be that the leopards were so used to being hunted that they remained so elusive, and that's why it's very special here in the Sabi Sands. There hasn't been any hunting for a good few decades, and that's why we can get to see these animals so closely, because they've got nothing to fear. They can just live their lives, interact as they do. Or it could be that they have adapted. Now, it could be that there's a high density of leopards here in the Sabi Sands. In our 1,000 hectares that we traverse, we have seen, certainly in a couple of years previously I was driving from WildEarth, we counted I think 11 leopards utilising this property, and that was without the ones that weren't seen. It could have been 12 actually, with that last unknown male coming through and interacting with Shivambalana. So they have just lost visual of her. She went east. So if they were just on the southern side of quarantine, she's gone into that that block between Gowrie Dam, Twin Dams Road. So she could be heading this way. We're still quite away from them. I was actually going to say, while he was lying up there and I thought the hyenas were disappearing, that we were going to see if we could catch up with her. But it's certainly quite interesting to see the interaction going on here. But Kathy from Tennessee wanting to know if the leopard will actually see the hyena as a potential food source or a competitor. And they are competitors. You don't really hear of leopard killing hyena unless they're very young. Leopards, if they do come across baby hyena, would be likely to kill them. And it's the same for the hyenas as well. And unfortunately, Karula did lose one of her previous cubs from this litter that she's just had now. Oh, there's a view. I don't know if she's still around. I don't know if she's still the clan leader. But he sat on the log and he stood his ground, and she came right up to him, and they were almost like a metre away from each other. I thought they were going to touch noses at one stage. And they just looked at each other, and then she walked off, and he just remained on the log. But as soon as there is food involved, they are enemies. And as I say, it could be that this little guy has had experiences with hyenas, but I actually thought he was going to stand his ground because he knew the hyena was there. The hyena was on the bank, he was in the drainage line lying down, and he actually lay down. So I actually thought he was going to stand his ground, but I think it's because this little one was unsure of itself. And I think he picked up on that. But as soon as the second one came, there's two of them. And that's when, the odds start changing. So even though he is larger than them, and even I think if he had the attitude, he could possibly chase them off. But I think because there's the two of them, he's slightly more intimidated now. Individual kudu apart from their stripes, zebra, the giraffes with their spot pattern, and that's how we tell the leopards apart as well. And as I say, it is such a thrill to see the leopards and to look at their faces, because I use camera traps up in the area that I operate to try and locate my leopards. I very rarely see my leopards, and it's quite funny because the inside and the outside of the legs as well is how I quite often identify the leopards from the camera trap images, especially the night images. They just move that little bit too fast to get the really nice shots, unless they stand still in front of the camera. So spotted hyenas, it is possible. So, Kathleen, welcome on board. And I've just missed which falls you're from. But welcome on board. The Woodlands Kingfisher checking things out. So females mature roughly around 2 years old. Males maybe about 3 years old. But they'll tend to go or leave the communal dens when they're about a year, just over a year old, to go and start hunting with the female. So it's actually quite a long period of time before they're fully weaned. It's usually about 1.5 years before they're fully weaned. And as I say, the female's about 2 years old. That's what makes me think this one is still having that doubt. So maybe it's slightly younger than 3. It could even be about 2.5, 3. But if it's a male, that could also account for it being. But I still think it is a 3-year-old. But males aren't as aggressive as females. The females have a lot of testosterone in their bodies, so they're much bigger than males, and they tend to be a lot more bolder than the males, the females. And it could be that other adult that came in was actually a female, and that could account for the smaller one that we were watching to begin with was submissive towards it. And you can see that that other animal didn't even bother smelling the first hyena that we were with. Yeah, morning, go ahead. You're more than welcome. I'm on that two-track. I'm on the two-track from Avubu. Oh, sorry, radio's cutting out. Two-track from Avubu. You're welcome to. Because that first hyena was certainly submissive to that second hyena, without a doubt. And the hyenas are very intelligent. And they've actually found there was a group of captive hyenas, and they tested their intelligence and their ability to work together. And they actually had the hyenas in a room, and one hyena had to put its foot on a plate. They had to push this plate down, and the other hyena had to pull a piece of string. Now, they could only get the piece of food if both of them did it simultaneously, and one animal couldn't do both. So it didn't take them too long to work this out. So the one had to push the plate and the other one had to pull the string. And what was really interesting, when they swapped the members around, the dominant animal would actually be allowed to be taught by a subordinate who knew how to get to the food. And that was quite amazing, because, as I say, the hyenas can be quite aggressive, they can be quite dominating towards the subordinates. But the fact that the more dominant animal would actually step back and be taught by the subordinate really says something about the intelligence of the animal. And I think that's one of the reasons why they are so adaptable, and that they are so widespread as well. Obviously the quarantine male can still see them. You can see he's panting because he's actually been feeding, so his body temperature is going to start rising. And the temperature is starting to increase, but he does have quite a nice shady spot here at Juma Game Reserve. And that is the beauty of joining us live here on the safaris. We don't know what's going to happen. We just have to take what's happening and try and interpret it as best we can. And the longer that we stay, the more information that comes through. And that is one of the things I love about just watching wildlife. That is where you learn so much more than just going through and going, tick, I've got a leopard, tick, I've got a spotted hyena, let's move on. The secret is staying and observing. Such good condition. He really is doing well for himself. I'm so proud of him.